Hello, everybody, and welcome to Peter and Debra are doing a podcast. We're now in the second week back at work for us in January, and thankfully the weather's warmed up slightly because that cold weather was utterly miserable. Anyway, how are you, Peter?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very well. I've enjoyed looking out of my home office window the last day and a half, watching some tree surgeons performing spectacularly in these two. We've got two beautiful trees, which are quite a feature, but they are large, so they need to be cut back, but they need to be cut back beautifully. And the skills which they demonstrate of A, athleticism, and B, creativity, are quite a sight to behold. I've been captivated.
Oh, wow. That reminds me. So just before Christmas, I went and did a keynote session at a charity called Perennial. And Perennial is the only charity, as far as I'm aware, in Britain that provides support to horticulturalists. Okay. You know, so they give money away, they give advice and guidance, they support, because apparently people who work in horticulture, which includes tree surgeons, often have very poor pensions. It can be very seasonal work, so it's not very, you don't necessarily get regular income unless you're sort of tending the gardens of Blenheim Palace. And even then, sort of professional paid gardeners, it's not necessarily very well paid. So this charity is dedicated to, supporting them, helping them through, for example, cancer diagnosis, giving them money when necessary, etc. And so, and tree surgeons are apparently a part of the people that they serve. And I just thought, that's very cool, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it can be quite lucrative if you're a skilled tree surgeon. But I guess, like any profession, there'll be people who'll be doing well and people who are doing less well. The range of prices I was quoted was extraordinary. And there are different ways of doing it. You can kind of brutalize the tree, or you can really love the tree. And between Becky and me, we're somewhere in the middle. She would, a bit like haircuts, she wants as much taken off as possible, so you don't have to go back for a long time. Whereas the horticulturalists will tell you about cutting it in the right place, and having the tree looking beautiful. Yeah. Actually, if you cut it back too far, it grows too fast. I've learned quite a lot about this from my tree surgeons in the last day or so. It's been fun. But yeah, the great outdoors. I mean, when I was at the lottery, and we did some big award partner programs for mental health and wellbeing, and the one that everyone remembers is Time to Change, which was addressing the kind of stigma of mental health and did great things. But there was another program which Mind were the award partners for, which was all about getting outside and in the fresh air and taking walks and supporting lots of small charities and community groups that were using the outdoors to encourage and enable people to improve their mental health, which was a good program. I don't know. I mean, there were all sorts of little groups which were supported.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because at DSC we have a wellbeing group which is comprised, primarily of staff. And they do a wellbeing bulletin every month where they sort of update on really good news. They point people to sources of support for mental health. They share good news stories and things like that. And every month they have a challenge. We call it the photo challenge, and it's to encourage our staff to get outside. So it's like, send us the best photo of something that, something beautiful about winter, or show us the first signs of spring, or show us your, whatever. And actually the staff love it. Loads of them take photos and share them and stuff like that. It's very much part of us saying get outside. Not that I ever practice what I preach, because I really don't like outside, especially at this time of year. I'm happy to look at it from inside where it's warm. I don't actually want to venture out. But actually, I also know it's incredibly good for your mental health to be engaged with nature. So our team at DSE really encourage that with our staff. So yeah, it's very true.
So get ready for a seamless link here, because you mentioned photographs, and you sent me a beautiful manipulated image of Arthur as a Christmas card in response to my AI generated picture of our 4 cats all sitting beautifully with one another wearing Santa hats, which is the most ludicrously false image of 4 independent beasts ever. But all of a sudden, manipulated images are the news of the day, aren't they? And Elon Musk, at this time last year, I remember us having a kind of conversation about some dreadful things that he was saying about the minister Jess Phillips, and but actually calling out the lack of action in relation to grooming gangs and child sexual abuse and this sort of thing. And in the wake of what a lot of people, including myself, reacted to with kind of some horror, quite a lot happened that otherwise wouldn't have been the case. And all of a sudden, X, Twitter, Grok is in the news because the company has launched something which has horrified many people in terms of its ability to manipulate images, which again, I'd be interested in how it seems to you. As someone who's been steeped in this world for quite a while, I kind of feel anyone and everyone has been manipulating images for as long as we've had computers, and certainly there are all sorts of AI tools you can use to make all sorts of images, but this has clearly triggered something which has been desperately difficult and upsetting to a lot of people.
Well, I think to be honest, so speaking personally as a woman, I think that the outrage is about the sexualized nature of the manipulation for both women and children. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is like the thought of somebody taking my head and then putting some naked body or semi-naked body on it just fills me with fear. Fear is my biggest, thing, and disgust and all the rest of it. So I think it's about that. I don't think that people have issues really with manipulating images, because everybody does, like Photoshop. And we've had Photoshop for years, where we've brushed up photos and stuff. But it's about the specific actions around it. And also the fact that, from what I understand, Elon Musk, I beg your pardon, Elon Musk's response to it has been to say it's got to be a paid for service. So basically, kind of the assumption is that if you can't afford to pay, that means you're the problem, you're the ones doing the manipulations. Whereas if you can afford to pay, that means that, you're not the people who are doing it. And as you and I well know, Peter, abuse does not take any notice of class, wealth at all. It's like it's rife everywhere in whatever field works. So I think, but what I'm really encouraged by is that the Prime Minister is saying, if you don't fix this and get it sorted so it's not possible, we will seriously consider banning Twitter. I mean, we were talking about it, our staff check-in this morning, because we stopped using Twitter, I think it was last year sometime, maybe the year before, I can't remember, when everybody else was stopping using it. And at the time, we had some big debates in the organisation about, was it the right thing to do? I mean, my line was, if we come off it, we're leaving it to all the evilness, is that, charities need to be in those dangerous spaces to show that there are alternatives. Whereas other staff were like, we shouldn't legitimise this, we need to change it. And so we took, the board took the decision that we would come off Twitter altogether. But the government, of course, has still been using it. And I can understand why, because, the reality is millions, if not billions of people use that platform to communicate, to get information, all the rest of it. And like any government has to be where people are, just saying, I don't approve of where you are is not enough. However, if what it takes is to ban the whole thing, to get a social media company to sort itself out and to, generally make children and women safe, then I think that's probably a good thing. But I don't know what you think.
Well, I was really encouraged that the government and Ofcom stood up to one of the biggest, most powerful platforms in the world on a point or two of principle, because it's really important that the Online Safety Act has teeth, and certainly in relation, I mean, let's break down some of the things which people are offended by to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, some of these images are absolute point blank illegal, and they're illegal now. So child sexual abuse images and manipulated child sexual abuse images should not be there. And anyone who has posted and circulated those should feel the full face of the law. And if the platform has launched an upgrade that has made that easier and allowed that to proliferate, then that's what the new legislation is there.
Is that test. About circulation, though, Peter? So if you sexualize an image of a child just for yourself, is that legal?
You can't produce child sexual abuse images either. So children are different from women in this regard. Yeah. So that's the first kind of stage of it. Yeah. Then there's some intent around violence against women and girls and misogynistic behavior and all the rest of it, where some laws have been passed to strengthen in there, but they haven't yet come into effect. And so this is one of these classic things where everyone assumes something's happened, but the eye's been taken off the ball. And a number of us campaigning in this area have been saying, just get on with it, just do it faster. And so once again, I think, it's a terrible way for it to have happened, because we are in the classic way in this whole world making progress by breaking things, but as a consequence of this situation that is now, I think Liz Kendall has told the House of Commons, is going to be accelerated and enacted. So there will be greater protection for women around the circulation of, certainly the circulation of, and maybe I'm not sure about the detail, but the generation of images too. But there's plenty of legislation and plenty of conversation that's taken place in Parliament around the whole kind of context, revenge porn and the generation of images designed to hurt and all the rest of it, which the intention of the law is to address. And this, because it's been done so publicly by such a big platform, has thrown that into sharp relief and not before time. At the heart of this, so much comes back to, well, I think a lot of it comes back to consent, doesn't it? So you didn't have the consent of Arthur the dog to manipulate his image, but that's being rather kind of frivolous.
He was begging me to do it, Peter.
When it comes to, I believe I need and should have your consent if I want to generate an image of you in a humiliating situation of one kind or another. So there's something about all of that, but then there are some freedom of expression considerations to take into account here. So if I make a rude and offensive joke about you, do I need your consent in order to poke fun at you? Well, no, we've all got to kind of, I was going to say man up, which is classic, person up for that kind of context. But again, the kind of the power imbalances here need to be taken into account. It's difficult to sort of legislate in this space, but there's the potential to do it, and we're taking a stand. And the company either has to demonstrate that it is designing with these issues in mind, or be removed.
But the response to all these things, and you've mentioned this before, Peter, about Australia banning social media for young people under 16. I just think, we have a habit of blaming the victim. So I think about women's issues. Women are told you've got to be safe. Let everybody know where you're going. Don't go anywhere on your own. Don't walk alone at night on your own. Make sure you've got a friend with you, etc. So we're told all the time, you don't get messages to men about, do not attack women. Well, you do, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's all about how we, the victim, have got to change, or potential victim. And with this, it feels the same to me. It's like, children are not at fault here. And, why should we deprive them of something that for many is hugely valuable, gives them support, helps them to feel less lonely, that probably they got more addicted to because of the pandemic, when they physically couldn't see people, so they would use social media a lot more, rather than directing it at the perpetrator, the people who design these things. So saying to Twitter, to Elon Musk, you must design this so that it's not possible for this to happen, or if somebody is doing it, you need to let the police know so that they can be arrested, or whatever it is. I think that we ought to aim it at the perpetrators.
A lot of this then does come back to education and attitudes, doesn't it? Because when is an image sexualized and when is it not sexualized? In the kind of, never mind the law, but in kind of common sense terms, consent matters massively here, doesn't it? I mean, it's the lack of consent to proliferate images that have been generated without someone saying yes, that's okay, and then automatically sharing them around, which is so offensive and creates the fear that you're describing. So this is a really good test case, I think, of whether the regulation, the legislation, and the intent behind the legislation is going to work, and it's going to work against one of the major platforms. So we will see. But because these things seem to take so long, I do understand why people then get impatient and say, well, we should withdraw completely, or people shouldn't be allowed to access it. So then that brings us on to, I think, the social media bans for under 16s, and whether charities should or shouldn't be on X, or whether X should be banned completely. And I think that here, like you, it does come back to safety by design, and we don't stop kids from playing sport because it's dangerous. We make reasonable adjustments in the regulations of sports to create age-appropriate experiences, and that's like what the digital world should be. And platforms claim that there are no kids below 13 or whatever on them, and yet I saw something circulating earlier this week, which was a message from Google that a parent had sent to their 12-year-old saying, "Congratulations, you will shortly be 13. You will be able to remove these parental controls." And you'll be able to. And you just think this completely.
So wrong.
This is the point. It's not about when's the first moment can we get hold of this young person and exploit them for all they're worth. It's how can we design a world in which we appreciate and understand.
But I think we absolutely have to punish those people who think like that and do things like that. It's just so wrong-minded to like market to a 12-year-old that they can get themselves rid of parental controls at 13. It's just not right. And no parent, I think, would ever be happy about that happening. So it's like somebody somewhere in that organisation, whichever one it was, said this is a good idea. It must have gone past some kind of marketing or sales team. So they need to be punished. They need to be held to account. Honestly, Peter, I feel so strongly about this. And that's why, with Keir Starmer, I would actually be super happy if we got to the stage where we banned Twitter from the UK. Not because I think that we shouldn't have Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called, but because I think that would send a bit of a shockwave. Is that, if you can do it for this, lot, it means the others are going to be banned. And so that would get them to up their game a bit more. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like what you're saying about Elon Musk stirring the waters, breaking something. If we could do the same back to say, right, and this is the way you need to get your act together to get this sorted out. Because the trouble is, I get so frustrated about it. But it's like it's human beings hide behind businesses and shareholders and capital and all the rest of it. And it's ultimately a human being somewhere, or a series of human beings have made decisions. And unless you hold those people to account, it's just not going to change, because people will always be able to hide behind stuff. That's why, for example, I know it's a very complex area, but, corporate manslaughter, for example, I think is a very good thing that you as a chief executive can be held accountable if somebody from your workforce dies on the job because you didn't ensure that safety happens. And even if they were millions of miles away from you in terms of structure and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think sometimes, like, we're too nice about it. We're too kind. We're too understanding. We're like, let's take everybody else's point of view. No, Peter, no. It's wrong. And the people who perpetrate this shit need to be held accountable and pilloried, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't care if people say I'm being unkind.
Well,
I don't feel kind about these things.
I think the next couple of weeks are going to be a really exciting and fascinating moment, because there's existing laws in relation to children and child sex abuse images, which this is a really high profile context in which to test and address. Then there is some emerging law which is going to kick in around non-consensual sexualized images, and then beyond that there's a much deeper issue underlying your rant, if I may call it that, around the addictive nature of the business models of these companies. And we can rail against that and say we don't like it, but it's not illegal for them to market towards their consumers. But the ways in which they are doing that at the moment to young people especially is, I believe, and I think you believe, unacceptable and intolerable, and something's got to be done, and that's beyond the fundamentals of child protection.
What we need is the
traditionally defined.
Yeah, what we need is the modern day equivalent of the stocks, isn't it? What we need is, it's not wrong for us to highlight and name individuals who are allowing these things to happen. So Elon Musk is responsible for Grok, which is creating these images. That man has allowed that to happen. And whether it's Meta, whatever the thing happens to be, I think the public shaming often makes a difference. And I think that there is a place for public shaming, even though it sounds awful to say, I think it's nonetheless true. But actually, can I do a worse segue than you?
Well, let me just say one more thing on this topic, which is that I thought it was interesting that we're recording this on Tuesday. In the Times today, Melanie Phillips, the right-wing commentator, wrote a column about why libertarianism, pure libertarianism, free for all, is not, in her view, the way to proceed, and that a civilized society prioritizes the contributions of others. And that, from her, was quite interesting. And I think on the basis of that, she would be lining up with you to throw things at Elon Musk in the stock. So maybe we've reached a moment where he's, generated such a kind of coalition of intolerance that we might make a bit more progress, but we'll see. Anyway, go on, do your segue into something else.
I'll do my. So it's when you talked about emerging.
Yeah,
I thought that segues beautifully the word emerging into the topic of mergers in charities. See what I did there?
Go on then.
It was terrible, worse than yours. No, I was just very struck this week. Kate Lee, the new chief executive of NCVO, who's just a breath of fresh air and a pot stirrer and challenger and just super, super, super tip-top person. But she was writing about charity mergers, and she was saying that we as a sector need to be less afraid of mergers, much more willing to sort of look at them. And I have some views about mergers, which I'd like to run past you. So, and I have, been in charge of mergers. So firstly, I'm not sure there's ever such a thing as really a merger. Very often one organisation takes over another. Like, you call it a merger, but it isn't, because you don't keep the two identities. You typically don't create a brand new identity for the merged organisations. You keep one of the identities. And I think, for example, about NCVO merging with Volunteering England, and all that happened was volunteering got subsumed into NCVO. Yeah. The second thing is that the subsumed, or the taken over, or whatever the phrase you want to use, organisation, very often loses its sort of the focus on it, if you see what I mean. So when I was chair of the Small Charities Coalition, we merged with the Charity Trustees Network, which had a quite big membership, bigger one than we did, and we promised the trustees of the Charities Trustee Network that we would prioritise trustees as part of the merger. But of course, what happened was real life came along, and your ability to raise funds. Saying we serve trustees didn't get us any money. We just couldn't use that. And so therefore it lost its focus. And it's never, people absolutely go into these things fully willing to keep the promises that they made. But in reality, it's much, much harder to do. And often, it's, again, one of Kate's messages, we should not just think about merging when we're in trouble. We should think about merging, just thinking about the future. And I think there's something very compelling about that idea. But again, I think that, the thing is, it's about, for so many charities, it's about their objects and their identity. I remember years ago, I've forgotten his name now, Simon somebody or other, who was an MP. I think he was a Conservative MP for Southwark. And I remember being at a conference where he stood up and he said, there are like 16 homeless charities in Southwark. Why there's so many? There ought to just be one. And I can remember thinking, or saying at the time, well, the trouble is, that's all very well saying that, but you're just assuming that every homeless charity is the same. That every homeless charity does things in the same way, and they don't, is the reality. And if you've ever worked with homeless people, you'll know that they are human beings who have opinions and who I'm not going to that place because I don't like it. I don't feel safe there or other place. So I think there's something, anyway. And then the final thing, and I'm really interested in what you think, is that I've also noticed that very often in the charitable sector, when charities merge, when smaller charities merge with bigger charities, or two small ones merge into a big one, all that happens is something, they create a hole for that smaller charity and a new one pops up in its place. And it's one of the reasons I think why the Commission's website is so, why the Commission's, the number of charities on the register are so stable, is because people pop up, I want there to be a local charity for blind people in Birmingham. I don't just want to be a subset of, RNIB or whatever the thing happens to be. Anyway.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I suppose I am fundamentally driven by the desire to achieve impact and make a difference. And if I wear my Five Rights Foundation chair's hat, I think you'll struggle to find any other charity that has our expertise when it comes to the knowledge and understanding of regulation and legislation globally in relation to children's rights online. But we are tiny. What we haven't necessarily got, we haven't got, is kind of reach into every community. Now, do we need to merge with a huge organization with lots of kind of presence and boots on the ground, or do we need to influence the way in which they operate to use our knowledge and insight so that they all become informed and better at what they do, or we have access to even more young people out and about on the ground? So playing to respective strengths I'm definitely interested in strategic alliances to achieve change. But then I guess that gets you into, so then do all those organizations need their own finance directors and HR directors? And there must be some resource duplication in there, which is theoretically true and operationally harder to pull off. One of the other things I think I heard Kate say was that the overhead for charities is overwhelmingly people, and so it does cost us a lot to employ people full time in all these jobs and activities of one kind or another. And maybe we're going to move to a world where more people are buying in bits of expertise on a short term basis, which again, intellectually and theoretically is very attractive. Practically, what it means for the employment rights and the stability of life for those experts that are being bought in or are working sort of 0 hours contracts for
it's also
3 or 4.
It's practically a nightmare, Peter. I've seen this happen so many times where people say it's a really good idea. Let's share HR, let's buy in accountants or whatever. The trouble is you're then competing with all their clients. You think about auditors, the audit process. Every charity has to negotiate with its auditor when the audit can happen, because they've got so many charities that they need to audit and only so many people, otherwise it's too costly for them. So there's a reality that gets in the way. But I was really struck by, you talked about strategic alliances, because as you know, I feel very strongly about collaborative work. I feel very strongly about people coming together, sharing, like the civil society group, the resources we share. Not so much money and back office stuff, but although we do share tips and advice, but we share policy thinking and documents and things like that, so that others who don't have those resources can use the stuff that we've produced. And that I completely agree with. But I think a merge is a different thing. So if you think about Five Rights, for example, do you think Five Rights would have more impact if it merged, for example, with the NSPCC or the Children's Society? And would you therefore do it, even though you know that it would lose its identity as Five Rights? I mean, by the way, can I say, any listeners, this is not committing Peter to anything.
No.
I put him on the spot, and he's not saying anything that needs to be used against him in his role as chair of Five Rights. Making that really clear.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important for any organisation to know and understand what its distinct strengths are and the impact it's seeking to achieve, and to have a kind of strategy to aim at. So it's not impossible that association with another organization could accelerate the progress, but there are all sorts of other reasons why, as a small organization, you would be nervous and anxious that you would be swallowed up by bigger organizations. And I've said this before, that as the chair of the chief executive of the NSPCC, when I started showing an interest in the way in which we could bring the insight which Childline was understanding about young people's lives to a wider set of children's issues, quite a lot of other charities felt threatened by that. They didn't see it as a strategic alliance or intelligence to be gathered. They saw it as, NSPCC is getting involved in mental health or this or that. So I think Kate is right to point out that there's a instinctive sense of
resistance
being threatened. So we talk warmly about the value of collaboration, but when it kind of crunchily comes down to and how might we react to a situation where we've got less resource than either of us has got to achieve something more powerful together, it's harder. And whether that means losing the whole identity of a charity, you can see why people would be
reluctant
to do that, especially if they're a small charity with 1 or 2 members of staff.
Well, it always makes me laugh. It's like when people say, when people within our sector talk about too many charities, my response is always, well, close yours then. It's like, if you genuinely believe that, you can make a big step by just shutting yours down or merging with somebody else. Of course, people don't want to do that because the people, and I put Kate on completely to one side of this because I think she's raised a really important question, and it's like, I'm really glad she said what she said. But there is this, the people who can say about, there should be more mergers are usually those who feel in a position of strength. Like, you're going to merge with me and, I will take over. And actually, the other interesting thing is, lots and lots and lots of charities do attempt mergers. They start initial conversations. Sometimes they even get as far as drawing up, terms of agreement or whatever it's called, MOUs. And many of them fail. Because when it comes to the crunch, but of course you never hear about these because nobody boasts about a failed merger. Nobody says, well, we had a chat about merge and then we discovered that we really couldn't stand the values of that charity and so we didn't want to do with them. Or the chief exec couldn't get on, or the finance director. We could only keep one finance director and one of them refused to cooperate. Do you know what I mean? It's like all the cold, hard realities. And a lot of that, I hear about them all the time, of course, because, when people are talking to you confidentially as a chief exec or a chair, so I know that there are loads of failed attempts at mergers, but you never ever hear about those. So there's never really any opportunity to learn any lessons from it. Anyway,
and it is more tempting to start again with a fresh sheet of paper and get some new resource from a new source of funding to do something flash and different than it is to inherit the legacy problems of another organisation and to sort those out together before you then start looking forward. So
because if you're feeling financially healthy, you don't tend to want to merge. You tend to want to merge when you're in trouble. So that's very true. I'd love to know, actually, and I don't know, but there may well be, and I'd love if anybody knows of it. I'd love to know if there are examples of 2 organisations who merged, like properly merged. In other words, created a new identity out of that merger. They've made a new name and then set a new set of values and, set a new set of charitable objects. I'd love to see that because that for me is exciting. That's
closures would be
bring 2 entities together, huh?
Closures would be an interesting topic as well. So what if more of us said we have a finite period to achieve as much as we can, and at the end of that period we will wind things up, and then someone else can start in a fresh and new and interesting way doing something different. And funders seem to like fresh and new and interesting rather more, and they might like the idea of tying everything up and that sense of this is what we've achieved together. So that might be a way. Anyway, to be continued.
I'm
gonna let you go.
I will enjoy your premiere tonight, Peter, whatever it was you were going to.
Oh yes, I'm off up to London to join. I don't know if it's public or not. Anyway, no, I'm going somewhere, and I'm looking forward to it.
And I'm going to be reviewing our trustee recruitment process as we're, looking at new trustees this year. So I think mine is probably way more exciting than yours, Peter.
I think it is. Who knows? Very
anyway,
good.
Bye,
all right,
everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Next week.
Bye.